Hi guys, this is Miss Galloway, and I'm going to continue with our discussion of the Iranian political system. Couple of things. First of all, I do apologize because I'm sure the sound quality is significantly worse right now because I am not using my good mic. I am instead using the crappy built-in one to the laptop, which is not so great. Additionally, I'm recording this with the air conditioner unit in the classroom going on, so there's probably some background noise, so I'm sorry. However, it is what it is. So here we go. We left off talking about the Guardian Council and how their two major powers, first and foremost, are to either veto legislation coming out of the Majlis, that is the legislative branch, and to vet candidates for elected office in Iran. Now, let's talk about the Assembly of Religious Experts, and that's who these dudes are right here, and you will also notice they are all dudes. And that is because this is a body of clerics. It is made up of religious leaders and therefore is going to be full of men. There are 86 members in the Assembly of Religious Experts, and they are all directly elected by the people. They serve for 8-year terms, which means that they could see 2 terms of office worth of a president in terms of his service. Now, the Assembly of Religious Experts, primarily, its duties are, they really have to do with the role of the Supreme Leader. It is this body that elects a new Supreme Leader when the previous one dies. So they've obviously only done this once with the death of Ruhollah Khomeini. So they haven't done it yet. When Ali Khamenei dies, this is the body that will ultimately replace him. Chances are the person who will become the next Supreme Leader is someone who has either served on this body before or is currently a member whenever the death occurs. Now, this is the only body in Iran that has the power to dismiss the Supreme Leader. That's a big deal. There is no other body that can remove the Supreme Leader from power. Now, the fact is, however, that this is basically a rubber stamp organization, and it is very unlikely to ever fight back against the Supreme Leader. So part of the reason why it's unlikely to ever fight back against the Supreme Leader is because of the fact that every candidate who is directly elected by the public to serve on this body has to be subjected to approval by the Guardian Council, which means that 6 of the 12 members of the Guardian Council are directly appointed by the Supreme Leader, and the other 6 are chosen by the head judge, who is appointed by the Supreme Leader. So this whole system becomes very circuitous. And essentially what that means is that it's very, very, very unlikely that any reformist candidate will ever be put into the position where they get to choose who the next Supreme Leader is. So therefore, this is going to stay a very conservative, very status quo-oriented body. Now, the next major element to the theocratic rule in Iran is the Expediency Council. Now, the word expediency means to make things go faster, and that's what one would hope would occur with government efficiencies and all, but no, that's not what happens here. So the Expediency Council is made up of 32 members. Now, there's nothing explicitly stating that it must be made up of 32 men, but thus far, it's basically all men. These 32 members are, again, appointed by the Supreme Leader. This is not a democratically elected body. And it always includes the President of Iran, the Chief Judge, the Speaker of the Majlis, the jurist from the Guardian Council, and a number of vice presidents, because there are multiple vice presidents in this system. Now, one thing I will point out about this is that if we're looking for parallels here, the Expediency Council is sort of like the Politburo. If you remember, when we talked about the USSR and China, we talked about the Politburo. The Politburo, remember, is comprised of sort of the central leadership of the whatever communist state we're talking about or centralized state we're talking about in the USSR or China. And in that regard, the Expediency Council is sort of like that, with the Guardian Council sort of being like the standing committee. Now, so this is comprised of the most powerful political figures in all of Iran, and people who are appointed to this position serve 5-year terms in this particular council. The whole purpose of the Expediency Council is to act as an intermediary between the Majlis and the Guardian Council, because the notion is that legislation comes from the Majlis and goes to the Guardian Council, which has the ability to either say yes or to veto it. Now, once it's vetoed, basically that's it. The Majlis has to start all over again with the legislative process. If there's a veto, it does not go back to the Majlis. That does not happen. This is getting very messy, but just deal with it. Instead, the Guardian Council essentially kills the bill. So the goal of the Expediency Council is to prevent that from happening. So what it can do is it can originate its own legislation. It can suggest to the Majlis, hey, here's a bill, you guys should take it up for debate and reform, and if it originates out of the Expediency Council, it is almost guaranteed to pass through the Guardian Council. Because, remember that whole thing where we talked about like the fact that this is the most powerful group of people in Iran? Some of those powerful people are jurists from the Guardian Council. That means that the Guardian Council, in fact, makes up some of the Expediency Council. Again, this whole thing is circuitous. Everything eats itself here. This is a snake eating its own tail. So the Expediency Council can write legislation that they will introduce to the Majlis, that then comes back to the Expediency Council where they say, yep, this is what we wanted. Then they pass it on to the Guardian Council who says, yep, this is what we wanted, because of course it is, because it was written by the Guardian Council. So this is a dumb system, but it gives the illusion of checks and balances where none is needed because everybody's on the same page. So obviously, why is this a concern? Well, first of all, because this is Comic Sans and I hate it, but also because of the fact that the Expediency Council is really just an outreach program of the Guardian Council. It is entirely born up in this notion of sort of giving the political structure what it wants in terms of an illusion of democracy without actually having to provide any of the competition. So let's talk now about the president of Iran. This fellow right here, that is the current president of Iran. That is Hassan Rouhani. So Hassan Rouhani is the head of government. Previously in Iran, the president was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Now, one thing you will notice about Rouhani here, based on the way he is dressed, you know that he is a cleric. Ooh, watch my terrible handwriting. So he's a cleric. Not all presidents are clerics. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was not, but most of them have been. So the clergy, excuse me, I'm so sorry. The clergy is deeply involved in all aspects of politics in Iran. Now, the president of Iran serves a 4-year term of office. And while there is a consecutive term limit, there's no total term limit. So you could serve one 4-year term of office and then not be reelected, and then run again and serve another 4-year term of office, and then serve another term of office, serving 12 years total. But so long as you're not president more than 8 years at a stretch, it's acceptable for you to do this. In this regard, it's a little bit like Russia, because remember, Russia allows for Putin, well, theoretically anybody, but Putin, to go and serve as president for a 6-year term, and then he can become prime minister, and then he could come back again. So the president is directly elected by the people, and in Iran, suffrage is universal, meaning that both men and women can vote. You only have to be 18 years old and a naturalized Iranian citizen. It doesn't require birthright citizenship, so you don't have to be born in Iran, you have to be naturalized. It is an absolute majority of votes, which means we gotta have 50% plus 1, okay? So 50% plus 1 in terms of the result. If nobody reaches 50% plus 1 in the first round of voting, they have a runoff, okay? So you've got a top 2 runoff if there's nobody who wins the first time. All presidential candidates are approved first of all by the Guardian Council and then sent to the Supreme Leader for final say. Last time, I believe they got it down to about 9 candidates. The 2005 election ultimately dropped it from 1,000 people who registered to run for president down to 7. And in the 2009 election, there were serious concerns about voter fraud. Essentially, it happened on the first round of the presidential election. The candidates were Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and a more reformist, moderate candidate. I wouldn't say that he was truly liberal, but he was definitely considered someone who was a moderate. Now, he was a cleric, so by our standards, very conservative fellow, but in comparison to a lot of sort of Iranian expectations, fairly moderate fellow. And a lot of people felt like he should have reached that 50% plus one mark, but he didn't. And in fact, he fell short of being the top 2 candidates, which meant that he was precluded from a runoff, which meant that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad secured a second term as president. People were furious about this, and they took to the streets in protest, largely organized through Twitter. Now, I have about 3 minutes left, so let me go through the rest of the president. So the president here must be at least 25 and no older than 75. Now, while there is no statement in the Iranian constitution that prohibits women from actively running for office at the presidential level, there is something called the well-known personality clause, which basically means that you have to be, quote, well-known, whatever that means, to the general public. And that is often used by the Guardian Council to essentially disqualify any woman who puts forth her candidacy. So there has never been a woman on the ballot in the Iranian presidential election, and it's very deeply unlikely that will ever happen. Additionally, you may not run for president if you are not of the Shiite sect of Islam. So if you are Sunni, you cannot run. If you are Christian, you cannot run. If you are Jewish, you can't run. And Zoroastrians can't run, even though they can hold seats in the legislature. And if you're Baha'i, forget it. You best get out of town because it's kind of dangerous to be a Baha'i. Okay? In terms of major powers, the president does have real powers. He chooses the president, the vice presidents. He chooses the cabinet ministers. He sets the budgetary goals. He presents legislation to the parliament. He can sign all treaties, laws, and agreement with the exception of laws pertaining or treaties pertaining to peace treaties, as well as matters regarding the declaration of war, because those are powers held by the supreme leader. He chairs the National Security Council, and he has the power to appoint all provincial governors, mayors, and ambassadors. Remember, this is a unitary system. Power flows from the center out, not anywhere else, okay? So it goes center out, and anything else, all power is devolved from the center. Now, I'm going to stop here because I'm running low on time, and then I will pick up, I'll pick up on the bureaucracy in just a moment.